This is RadPod, a podcast produced by ASMERT, the Australian Society of Medical Imaging and Radiation Therapy. ASMERT acknowledges the Bunurong people as the traditional owners of the land from which we record this podcast and pays respect to elders past and present. Hello, I'm Steve Lacey and I'm the Director of Education for ASMERT. Have you ever been working alongside a colleague and have thought, why are they getting sent home first? Or why did the boss take them out for coffee and not me? Or maybe you've been a student and thought, my clinical educator spends way more time with that student than she does with me. Or that student always gets better marks than me. Or perhaps you were that person who was given the special treatment, the time with the boss, the better marks, and you didn't even realise it. Or maybe your boss or clinical educator didn't realise that this was happening either. Well, this is called unconscious bias, and I'm joined today by two medical imaging clinical educators who have done a little bit of research behind this and have their own experiences to share. So our guests today are Jess Watson from Western Health in Melbourne and Leah Grinsted from the Royal Melbourne Hospital. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Jess, let's start with you. You've got another name for unconscious bias. Can you tell us what it is and can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so I have known the unconscious bias to be called the halo effect in my time. I came across it quite early on in my clinical educator career and I was a little bit confused as to what that meant. And so we did a little bit of research within our education team at Western. So it's basically like an error in human processing. So it's a mental shortcut that we would take. So we judge someone as being good or bad, and there's nothing really in between. We kind of align all of their personality traits to that one criteria, either good or bad. So it can influence, obviously, our judgment of people's performances, which is what we see it a lot in the clinical education space. And it's most notable in situations that have like a direct comparison. So if we're talking clinical education and we say students, it's like this student versus this student. I can't necessarily tell you I like Leah more than I like Steve.
Yeah.
I can't necessarily tell you why I like Leah more than I like Steve, but I can tell you that I think Leah is a better student than Steve is. So,
right.
You know what I mean? I can't literally say, these are the reasons that Leah is a better student. This is the reasons that Steve is a lesser good student.
A lesser good student.
A lesser good student.
Okay.
This is my education. That Steve is a worse student.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that when I compare Leah and Steve together, Leah comes out on top.
Yeah. So I guess an example would be that you ask one of your staff members, can you give me feedback on this particular fourth year student? And they say, well, they're okay, but compared to this other fourth year student, you're like, no, I don't want you to compare against them. I want you to just tell me what they are like by themselves.
Correct. It's easy to show preference to one side versus the other, even though that's not necessarily what you're being asked
Does
to
this bias occur from the beginning, like when you first interact with that student, or is that something that can build up over time?
From my research and my experience, it's generally when we talk the halo effect, it's something that starts from the get-go because it's that mental shortcut. I'm literally saying I'm judging all of your further attributes on this one short interaction that I've had with you.
And I think it's based on we take the easier path. So it's not something we do, with any sort of negative mindset. It's just you go, I'm going to take the easiest pathway and this is something I've judged you for and I'm going to go with what my judgment is in the first instance.
Right.
Yeah, it's not something we do maliciously.
Yeah, so that was going to bring me to my next question, which was why does this effect actually occur?
So I think it's literally just human error. The fact that we are all human. We all like to take shortcuts to get to the point that we like to get to, that we need to get to as quick as possible. And whether or not that's something that we consciously choose to do sometimes, which it is, we like to take shortcuts consciously at times.
Yeah.
But with this one, I think it's just a mental processing shortcut. This is just, I don't even realise that I've made this judgment, but my first interaction with you has allowed me to make this judgment, and going forward, this is probably how I'm going to perceive you.
And what is that judgment based on? Is it judged on how they look? Is it judged on how they smile at you? What is it?
So interestingly, a lot of the literature does base it on levels of attractiveness and what the person does deem to be attractive. So attractiveness necessarily correlates to competence or confidence in those ways. So that was a really interesting part of the research when I first started looking into the halo effect, is how much of the literature actually had to do with physical attractiveness.
Right. Okay. So who does it affect?
I feel like everyone.
Everyone.
Yeah. We're all human. We all are easily swayed with our biases and our judgments. There was a really interesting quote that I came across during my research, and it was, The writer has become convinced that even a very capable foreman, employer, teacher or department head is unable to treat an individual as a compound of separate qualities and to assign a magnitude to each of these in independence of each other. So basically, we can't narrow down certain aspects of people and give them a rating in and of itself. We are combining all of these qualities together and we are assuming that all of these qualities align, whether or not that is true for this person.
So in other words, it could mean that you are really, really good at one thing, but you're terrible at the rest of it. So I'm going to just deem that you're just terrible altogether.
Or really good altogether if that's the thing that you interact with. So it's really interesting in that way. It's overarching.
Yeah.
That's how you perceive that other person.
Yeah. So this can then be a problem for the students, right? So for example, a charismatic student that doesn't have the best skills may be able to mask this behind their charisma.
Absolutely. I feel like as educators, we've all seen that so many times.
Yeah.
It's the loud student. It's the student that's interacting with staff and making jokes and things that you scratch beneath the surface of their technical knowledge and it's not necessarily there. That's not the case for all of them, obviously, because then that would be making a bias on those students as well.
Yeah, right.
But it is something that I think we've all seen and all experienced in our time. The student that shows up late versus the student that brings morning tea because they baked something on the weekend.
Yeah.
One is definitely going to be viewed differently to the other.
Well, that's interesting because I've actually heard of students being judged, I guess, on what they bring on their last day and in terms of like what food do they bring on their last day? Do they bring a really, really good cake or do they just bring like a packet of M&Ms or something like that and that's it? You know, they are judged or final impression, I guess, is actually then given based on the food that they actually brought in on that last day. Terrible, I know. Leah, do you have any specific examples of the halo effect or unconscious bias that you can share with us?
Oh, yeah, mine would be probably before you actually see them. You know, you have an applicant for a fourth year final placement. They've come with a jam-packed CV and they've got really high-level results. They were school captain, they're sought after by other sites, and their reputation sort of precedes them. And so then when they get to your site, you sort of give them an independence early based on this idea, this perception. You might miss the learning deficits or the goals that they might need met while they're with you. So, yeah, you've sort of set them up for being at a higher tier than where they really are.
Yeah. What about the opposite way though, where they've actually given you an application or a CV and it hasn't necessarily been up to a very good standard and you think, oh, this student's going to be hard work, but they still get placed to your site or something like that and then you think, okay, I'm going to have to give them hard work and then they blow you out of the water because they're actually fantastic at the skills that they've got. I
feel like that way happens more often than the other way, yeah. People blow you out of the water because we're talking about students here who haven't written many CVs.
Yeah.
Yeah, we expect them to have great CVs and they haven't got the background for that. So, yeah.
Well, that's nice to know, I guess, then that the students that you're getting are better than what their CV is actually giving them credit for or anything like that. It doesn't mean that they need to work on their CVs though. And what about you, Jess? Any stories that you know of?
I feel like I don't have a specific story of it. I think the problem with the halo effect and these unconscious biases is that sometimes we can have them and they just pass us by without realising that we've even done it, even as educators who are privy to such a thing as the halo effect.
That's actually interesting you say that because one of the ideas that I first had when I thought about doing this particular podcast, and Jess, I think you and I spoke about this, was trying to get someone who has been the recipient of the halo effect. But I did think that was a little bit incriminating, I guess, more than anything, or it might incriminate other people, I think, more than anything else, right?
I think the one that does come up though a little bit just as a generic thing is like phone use and the students that pull out their phone and things on placement. They're sitting in a room of staff that have pulled out their phones and on placement, but the staff will automatically assume the student is not there to learn or not there to engage or, they're not a very good student because they've suddenly pulled their phone out on the placement also because they're basically probably mimicking the behaviour that they see around them. But it's one that I think we hold our students to higher account and therefore we put that bias onto them just because of that phone use and things in placement. That's one I think we've all seen before, the phone on placement for sure.
Yeah,
I think I've done that. I had a student last year who had his phone out and I was like, I can't believe we're giving a presentation and you've got your phone out. And afterwards I spoke to him and I was like, what were you doing on your phone? And he said, I was making notes and making sure I made some things to look up tonight because I didn't know the answers to some of the questions that you were asking. And you go, what you're actually using it as a tool to take down information and I've judged you on that, which is incorrect of me. So I've had to really step back and go, what are you using your phone for?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, lots of unis have dual factor identification these days. They need their phones. So, it's an interesting debate.
I think that's a good point, and it's good that we as clinical educators then understand that is the case, that sometimes things like phone use and that may look from the outside to be not a good trait to have, but really we've got to think about what they're actually doing on there. And so I know that when I used to have students on clinical placement, I would actually say to them, as far as phones are concerned, I'm not going to say that you need to have your phone in your bag, because I know that a lot of students now, we live in a digital age, so I know a lot of students now will be taking notes on their phone. Just be aware of how others may perceive it. So in those particular situations, we're aware of things like the halo effect, and we're aware that that can actually occur, and we're trying to warn others to say, don't be a victim of the halo effect by doing this, right? So I think these biases can have some sort of ripple effect. So, for example, word gets out amongst the staff that a student is struggling. And I know that I've been in a situation before where I've had a staff member that was about to start their employment in a hospital, and then someone else within that hospital already knew who that staff member was, and they had already given themselves their own bias of this particular person. And then, of course, they started talking to other people about it, and then that bias then kind of skyrocketed a little bit more, and people then started forming their opinion before they'd even met this person. And I was just like, hold on a second, make sure you look at what this person is, like, I guess, judge this person on face value and things like that, right? So if word gets out amongst the staff that a student is struggling, what effect will that have on the student, do we think, or on the bias itself?
I find it adds to the overly coaching where you have a student that's not meeting the targets where they want to meet, and you've got them on an action plan, say, and then the word spreads that this student's on an action plan. Everyone's stepping in to help this student, and then almost the student themselves can feel that shift, like, oh, everyone's watching me now. So their performance needs to be at a certain level that they may not be able to meet because they're becoming more and more anxious. So you're just circling around, not getting any better. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sort of skews their evaluation as well. And, as educators, you try not to come in and go, oh, okay, I've swooped in, I'm going to save the day with this student on this action plan. They're supposed to set their own goals and meet them, but at the same time, as staff can perceive it as that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we can also go back to the comment that you made quite early on in the piece. Like, if you do one thing well and everything else terribly, are you going to be judged on everything else that you did terribly, or that one thing that you did well? So if you're struggling in a certain area, that doesn't mean you're going to struggle in every area. But there may be that perception that you will.
Yeah, exactly. So we do clearly see this around the supervision of students. So do you think that there are biases towards specific groups of students? So, for example, are students from, say, one university perhaps preferenced over another purely because of the way that the university works, or through other students that you've seen from that particular university? And I would like to be clear here and say that this is at a direct supervisor level and not at a clinical educator level.
Yeah, for sure. I think that just working with students that have potentially done the same course that you did, you kind of have that like kinship between them. You understand the content, you understand the way the university worked and the layout of the university and what the experiences might be. So there's, I guess, a potential for you to have a preference of working with students that did the same course as you, or have that, like, it's very American, but that alma mater kind of vibe to it. It's like, oh, we are the same person. Yeah. We went to the same university, or things like that. But it's a tricky...
It is, but let me give you an example. You've got a student who has just turned up from X university, and the previous 3 or 4 students that you directly supervised from that same university were all mediocre. And you think, right, well, if they're all mediocre, this student's going to be mediocre, so I've got to make sure I work with them a little bit harder than I would normally work with another student.
I guess there is the potential for it to be interpreted that way. I think that we're both very lucky in the fact that we work in big teaching hospitals that have a lot of throughput with students. So I think our staff are kind of used to the ups and downs that may come with all different student placements. But I don't think that bias wouldn't exist in some people.
So this can also have the opposite effect, though, that the students have their biases towards certain clinical placements because they've heard about other students having certain experiences in clinical placements. Leah, what have you heard about that? Anything?
Oh, I've definitely heard a lot about this. Yeah, you hear lots of rumours about spreadsheets and things about different placements. But in terms of my major metropolitan hospital, that it can be quite an overwhelming site when you first arrive, and that can be based on not much. Like you go, we are a very large site, but because of that, we've got lots and lots of educators. So it actually is quite supportive. But at the same time, some people might perceive it as overwhelming. So trying to change people's perception before they walk in the door with how you greet them, where you take them initially. Don't walk them through the major public hospital so that they get lost and then can't find their way out. Those sorts of things to try and stop that at the get-go.
Yeah. And I think, again, that can have the opposite effect where some clinical sites can be given quite a big praise because students in the past have had really, really good experiences and everyone wants to go to that hospital, and then all of a sudden a student turns up expecting it to be, all bells and whistles, and they may have a particularly hard time because they're finding it quite a challenging environment or something like that. So they've already got that bias in the opposite way, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So away from the students, how prevalent do we think this is in a general staffing environment? Do we have any examples of how this can be used at a staffing level as opposed to just at a student level?
Yeah, I think it could be quite prevalent with the staffing level as well. An example I've got is, someone's training in a modality and, they've got a serious life event going on outside of work. They continue training, they continue coming to work, but the training's going slower than what you think it should be. Moving on 2 more years of they've training in a different modality, and that perceived problem with training, that they've got difficulties, they're slow to train, comes with them, and they're not actually having any problems at all. The life event is no longer an issue and they're fine. They're meeting all of the standards, but we still have that perception that they're going to struggle and they might need more time. So yeah, it's hard to sort of shake those reputations once they're built.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why people are very reluctant to disclose any mental health issues that they may have, particularly if it's something that's only a short-term one, because then that can have long-term effects for them in terms of that bias as well, right?
Definitely.
Okay, so we've talked about the halo effect and how it happens. Jess, how can we overcome the effect itself?
So I guess the best way to overcome such a thing as a halo effect or these unconscious biases is just to be conscious of them. I mean, to know that we as humans are probably developing them with every interaction that we have with new people or even people that we have met before, and just to be conscious of the fact that we don't want to start perceiving people to be entirely one way or the other way.
Yeah.
We don't want to sit here and say, I didn't really enjoy that conversation that I had with Leah the other day, so therefore I don't really want to have conversations with Leah in the future. I feel bad for pointing that out to you. But,
Poor Leah.
I know. I feel like I've thrown both of you under the bus without wanting to name any other names. I don't want to bring a Bob into the room. But I think that it can be really challenging to be so conscious of something that is deep-rooted within our subconscious. And I think the only thing that we can do in our space as educators and in our space as people is to just be conscious and to be putting this out on such a platform so that more people become aware of these unconscious biases that they may be developing without their knowledge.
Yeah.
I think reflection as well, and reflecting with other people. So seeking other people's opinions on what might be your bias, what might be their bias, especially with employment or recruitment of students, or get a rubric happening. Make sure everyone's on the same page and you go, what is it that we actually want in a student? We don't need them to look a certain way. We don't need them to behave a certain way. We want to have a diverse department. Everyone's welcome. So let's all get on the same page, use a template or a rubric and go, okay, this student matched our site because A, B and C. Yeah, rather than the way they look or what they wore to their interview.
Yeah, I think the rubric is a good idea, and I think that universities already use this for students to come out on clinical placement. They use rubrics to basically try to take out the subjectivity and the bias that someone will actually give them to say, well, this student's relatively useless or this student's a fantastic student based on what I'm visualising in terms of what they can do in that. They've got a specific rubric that they actually have to look at in order to properly assess this student based on the rubric itself, taking out any of that biases that they might have.
It's interesting that you say that, Steve, because one of the things that I found also is that as far as unconscious biases with the students and things, when we're rating on such a thing like a sliding scale, like a 1 to 10 kind of rating, it's actually really easy to be influenced by your unconscious bias on that and give a 7 instead of a 6 or whatever it may be. So one of the things that I did find also is that comment section, that like how to improve or, agreed actions or what we can do going forward, that action plan aspect of a student assessment is actually so important. It's more important than the numbers on the top, because that's actually the core things that you're commenting on and the core ways to move forward. It doesn't mean as much to the students as the 1 to 10.
Oh, they love the 1 to 10.
They love the 1 to 10, but it means more as actual context for things. It's like, this is my reasoning behind this, but it also allows us to have a real look at those numbers and what the numbers are that we're delivering versus what we're saying. Do they align? Does my 10 actually align with what I'm saying in my comments? Because if it doesn't, then I need to have a look at why my 10 is there.
But the 1 to 10s are often based on a rubric anyway that people need to be looking at and people need to be assessing 100%. Against that anyway. And that, you're right, it doesn't take much for you to just think I'm just going to rank this person out of 10, but you've got to have that backup and that reason why based on the rubric itself.
Yeah.
The comments are just ways of actually then further expressing that what you've actually done from the rubric. So what about those who are the victims, I guess, of halo effect? I'm not sure if I'm using the right term of victims, but the victims of the halo effect. How do they deal with the halo effect?
I guess it depends what side of it you're on. If you're getting all the good things for it, I think you're not really worried about it at all.
Keep quiet with it,
pipe
right?
down.
Yeah.
But I think if you're going in the more negative way, you know, keep your confidence steady, behave consistently and professionally, you know you're doing the right thing, and seek regular catch-ups with those who have this perceived bias. You know, if it's your supervisor or, you know, your modality lead, point out your successes and say, this is my goal, this is when I reached it, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Jess and Leah, thank you both so much for coming in and talking to us here today about this topic. I think it's really, really good for students, staff and clinical educators and managers to be aware of this very, very common occurrence. Do you have any last-minute tips or suggestions for our listeners out there to try and reduce the halo effect?
I think my only takeaway would be just to be conscious of it. Mm-hmm. Just know, maybe sit down and have a think about what biases you may have and when they're coming up and when they're coming into play, and just really think about if you're projecting those biases onto someone else unfairly.
Yeah, and I think model the behaviours as well. So, you know, as educators, people might look to us and go, okay, how are they managing this particular presentation? So you go model the way you want other people to behave.
Yeah, absolutely. Jess, Leah, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, you.
Steve. Thanks for listening to RadPod, a podcast produced by the Australian Society of Medical Imaging and Radiation Therapy.